Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing on August the 3rd. So that is not this coming Saturday, but the Saturday after. There is a very good card on in over in California, in LA. And it's headlined by Terence Crawford, who will take on ISRAIL Madrimov for the WBA and WBO super welterweight titles. Okay. And it's a very good card. It's a very good card. But what it is not, what it is nowhere close to being, is the greatest card ever. And I say this because I keep hearing people say this. Is it the greatest card ever? You know, look. There is such a thing, I mentioned this before, there is such a thing as the big lie. You know, it's lots of politicians throughout the ages have used it, where if you tell a colossal lie, if the masses even give it any kind of, even if they mention it, even if they mention it disparagingly, the fact that they're mentioning it gives it some sort of gravitas. In other words, it makes it a debate. Okay, even if it's now there can be no bigger lie than anybody saying, and yes, I'm looking at you, Eddie Hearn, this is the greatest card ever. Well, if it isn't the greatest card ever, it's pretty close to it. You know, it's a small step to that. In fact, Boxing News actually meant I'm paraphrasing it slightly, but not by much. They actually made that statement in today's Boxing News. You know, well, it's up there. No, it isn't up there. It's not up there at all. It's a very, very good card. I'm looking forward to it. I like it. But I'm convinced that a lot of people, they seem to believe that boxing history begins when they start taking an interest in boxing. So many people, and I'm serious about this. I mean, I'm not just talking about your casuals. Certainly this applies to your casuals, but sometimes I begin to think that people who class themselves as being knowledgeable about boxing, they pay no attention to the history of the sport. Now, I know a lot of people who are big boxing fans who are a lot younger than me, you know, 20, 25 years younger than me. So I'm going to go back in time. I'm going to go back to say, I'm just going to pick on one little period in boxing history, which is in my lifetime, but which goes back to before a lot of the people I know were even born. Okay, so it's a long way back to them, but to me it's not that far. You know what I mean? Because everything's relative. Let's go back to the first half of the 1990s. Some of those Don King cards that were on were absolutely stacked to the rafters with enormous talent, Hall of Fame talent, usually fighting each other, classic fights, and, you know, cards that dwarf this one on August the 3rd. They absolutely dwarf it. There is no comparison, isn't it? You know. So who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about, just off the top of my head, obviously Mike Tyson is an obvious choice. Julio Cesar Chavez, probably the greatest Mexican fighter ever, who spent a lot of his career fighting on Mike Tyson undercards. You know, he was so brilliant, and yet because he wasn't as big an attraction as Mike Tyson, because no one was, you know, considered to be some sort of, you know, close, if not a god, then damn close to it in Mexico, Chavez. He was fighting to Don King, he was fighting on the undercards. There was Julian Jackson, one of the most thunderous punchers in the history of the sport, who twice fought another of the great punchers, which was Gerald McClellan, okay, made famous for suffering, you know, extreme injuries when he lost to Nigel Benn. But don't make no mistake about it, he hit like an absolute freight train. And he fought Jackson twice. Can you imagine that these two enormous punchers, two of the biggest punchers of the last, you know, 50, 60, 70 years, maybe ever in the history of the glove game, colliding not once but twice. You know, Azuma Nelson, another one who appeared on these cards, fought Jeff Fenwick twice, Jeff Fenwick being one of Australia's greatest fighters ever, arguably their greatest. They collided twice. They got a controversial draw, which I definitely thought Fenwick won that fight. And then in the Australian rematch, Azuma knocked out Fenwick. Was it 6 rounds? I want to say 6. I might be wrong. I think it was 6. Okay, so we got those. We've got Lennox Lewis came on the scene and fought on a few of those big blockbuster cards. Fought. You don't need me to recap Lewis's career. It's a Hall of Fame career. Holyfield twice, Hasim Ruckman twice. They weren't all Don King cards, by the way, but the cards that he were on were stacked. If you want to go down to the lower weights, you had people like Ricardo Lopez, the magnificent Mexican fighter who was a strawweight champion and also won a title at maybe a couple of titles, light flyweight. Retired undefeated. Had a draw on his record, but avenged it with a points win. Retired undefeated. There were so many of these incredible cards stacked, top to bottom. I'm sure after I've finished doing this video, I'll think, why didn't I mention so-and-so? Why didn't I mention so-and-so? And as I say, Terry Norris and Simon Brown, they fought twice on Don King cards. The first fight was a real shootout. Brown knocked out Norris, then Norris came back in the rematch and outpointed Brown. They were both brilliant fighters. Simon Brown was a Don King fighter. Let's get perspective here. Because Eddie Hearn or any of his minions say that this is going to be, this is possibly the best card ever, it's absolute crap. It's typical Essex boy piss and wind bullshit. It really is. From a guy who, as a teenager, I always say this because I just think it's right. It kind of sums Eddie up perfectly. As a teenager, he made money cold calling people and selling them double glazing, which there was a lot of that went around in the 80s. Those wankers used to interrupt your tea, trying to sell you all sorts of shit. They used to prey on basically old age pensioners who didn't know any better, who'd pick the phone up and were a little mine all there, and suddenly they were 1,500 quid in debt. This was going back to the second half of the 80s. That kind of sums up Eddie for me, trying to sell snow to the Eskimos. The Eskimos who are suffering from dementia. But yeah, it's basically cobblers, and it's a lot of old crap. So don't pay attention. I mean, going through the card, it is a good card. Don't get me wrong. ISRAIL Madrimov fighting Terence Crawford. Yeah, looking forward to that. Good fight. David Morrell, who was avoided by Canelo, moves up to light heavyweight because he can't get the Canelo fight, and Canelo's holding all the belts to ransom. He's fighting Kaladzik for WBA. Vacant WBA light heavyweight title. I'm high on Morrell, as I've said in these videos before, very high on him. Isaac Cruz fights Jose Valenzuela, WBA super lightweight title. Andy Cruz is on the card. Who else is on there? Gerard Anderson and Martin Bacoli. That's a terrific fight. You got a fun heavyweight battle of the fatties with Andy Ruiz, Jarrell Miller. Yeah, it's a good night's boxing. Very good night's boxing. But the best card ever, a gilt-edged card. It's not even the best card of the last 12 months. So let's have some perspective, ladies and gentlemen. Please, comments below as always. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the like button as well. Go on, support the channel. And let me know what you think. Do you agree with me or not? It's a good card, but come on. Let's be realistic. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time as always. I'm looking forward to reading what you've got to say, and I will speak to you later. Bye for now.